Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On the 18th of April 1943, four teenage boys entered Hagley Wood in Worcestershire. Britain was deep into the Second World War, and the countryside offered a brief escape from rationing, air raids, and the constant pressure of wartime life. The boys were looking for birds' nests and eggs. What they found instead would become one of Britain's most enduring unidentified person cases, remembered through a single, unsettling question: who put Bella in the wych elm? Hagley Wood was part of the Hagley estate, a stretch of private woodland near the village of Hagley. The boys were not supposed to be there, which mattered later. They had entered without permission and knew that admitting it could bring trouble. As they moved through the trees, one of them noticed an old wych elm. Its trunk was broad and hollow, the kind of tree that naturally invites curiosity, so he looked inside. At first, the pale object in the darkness resembled an animal skull. The boy reached into the opening and pulled it closer. Then he saw teeth and strands of hair. This was not an animal, it was a human skull. Frightened, the boys put it back and left the woods. They reportedly agreed not to tell anyone, partly because revealing the discovery would also mean confessing that they had been trespassing on the estate. But a secret like that is hard to carry, especially at that age. One of the boys eventually told his parents, and the information reached the police. Officers arrived at Hagley Wood and examined the hollow tree. Inside, they found the remains of an adult woman compressed into the trunk along with decayed fragments of clothing. The tree had not merely grown around her. Someone appeared to have deliberately placed her body inside it. The location immediately presented investigators with a difficult problem. The woman had been concealed in a natural chamber, protected from casual view but exposed to damp, insects, and animals. A great deal of time had passed. There was no identification card, no handbag, and no obvious personal document. Whatever story she had carried into the woods had been stripped down to bones, fabric, and a few small possessions. Police recovered a wedding ring, a pair of shoes, and fragments of clothing. The ring suggested that she may have been married, though it could not prove that. Rings can be borrowed, inherited, purchased second-hand, or worn for reasons unrelated to legal marriage. Her clothing offered clues about her size and circumstances, but no label or unique feature immediately connected her to a name. Each object narrowed the possibilities slightly, while leaving the central mystery untouched. Additional bones belonging to one of her hands were found on the ground nearby, separate from the main remains. That detail would later inspire some of the most dramatic theories surrounding the case, but there are less mysterious possibilities. Animals may have disturbed the body, or the smaller bones may have fallen from the tree after decomposition. Investigators had to distinguish what had been done deliberately from what the woodland had done over many months. Professor James Webster, a forensic investigator, examined the remains. He estimated that the woman had been around 35 years old and approximately 5 feet tall. He believed she had died roughly 18 months to 2 years before the discovery. That placed her death somewhere around late 1941 or 1942, although forensic estimates from skeletal remains are ranges, not exact calendar dates. Webster also considered suffocation a possible cause of death. Material associated with the clothing was reportedly found in the mouth area, raising the possibility that she had been gagged or smothered. But decomposition had removed much of the evidence that might have shown injury or another cause. With no soft tissue and no reliable witness, the examination could suggest how she died, but it could not establish the cause with complete certainty. Now here's where the tree itself becomes important. The opening in the hollow trunk was narrow, and the position of the skeleton suggested the woman had been placed inside not long after death, before the body had become rigid or decomposition had advanced very far. That meant someone likely transported her to Hagley Wood, brought her to this particular tree, and forced or lowered her through the opening. It does not feel like a random choice. The hiding place was effective. From outside, the elm looked like one tree among many. Unless someone approached the opening and deliberately peered inside, there was little reason to notice anything unusual. Whoever selected it may have known the woodland, or perhaps they discovered the hollow by chance. Either way, the concealment allowed the remains to go undiscovered through changing seasons, while the war transformed everyday life around the estate. Investigators now faced two separate questions: who was the woman and who had placed her there? The first question had to come before the second. Without a name, police could not reconstruct her relationships, movements, or possible enemies. They circulated a physical description, compared the case with missing person reports, and asked other forces for information. Yet wartime Britain was a particularly difficult place in which to trace someone who had vanished. People were moving constantly. Servicemen and civilian workers were reassigned. Families relocated after bombings. Refugees and foreign nationals crossed regions under complicated circumstances. Records could be delayed, incomplete, or held by different agencies. A woman who disappeared might be assumed to have moved for war work, returned overseas, or simply lost contact. And if no one reported her missing, there may have been no official file for police to find. Her teeth offered one potentially distinctive clue. Investigators noted irregularities in the lower teeth and circulated details through dental publications, hoping that a dentist might recognize previous work or remember a patient. Dental identification can be powerful when records survive and there is a suspected name to compare. Here, police were working in reverse. They had the teeth but no patient, and the appeal apparently produced no identification. The surviving clothes were studied and reconstructed as far as possible. Police hoped that descriptions of the shoes, fabric, and garments might trigger someone's memory. Perhaps a relative would recognize the combination. Perhaps a shopkeeper or lodging house owner would remember her. But clothing in itself rarely provides a unique identity, especially once labels are gone. Common garments can tell you something about a person without telling you who that person was. The wedding ring created another avenue of inquiry, though again, one filled with uncertainty. If she was married, where was her spouse? Had she left a family behind? Was she estranged and living under another surname? Or had she worn the ring precisely so strangers would assume she was married? Investigators could not connect it to a jeweler, inscription, or household. It remained a deeply personal object with no surviving personal history. So let's pause on what police could reasonably infer. The woman was an adult of short stature, probably in her mid-30s. She had distinctive lower teeth, wore a ring, and had been concealed in Hagley Wood around the early years of the war. Someone likely knew she was there. Someone may have expected the tree to hide her indefinitely. Beyond that, nearly every interpretation depended on assumptions that the evidence could not firmly support. Then, in 1944, the case took an eerie turn. Graffiti began appearing that asked, in varying forms, who had put Bella in the wych elm. One early message was reported in Birmingham and referred directly to Hagley Wood. Later inscriptions appeared elsewhere, including on a monument near the woodland. The wording gave the unidentified woman a name that police themselves had never established. Bella. Why Bella? That question has never been answered. The writer may have known the victim personally. Bella may have been a nickname, an invented name, or simply a word chosen to make the message memorable. The graffiti could also have been written by someone repeating local gossip. Knowledge of the discovery was public by then, so mentioning the tree did not prove inside information. Still, the choice of name gave the mystery a new direction. The phrasing was unusual too. Some versions said, "Who put Bella down the wych elm?" Not in the elm, but down it. That language sounded almost like a taunt or a direct challenge to whoever might read it. Yet graffiti is difficult evidence. It has no reliable tone of voice. Without the writer, investigators could not know whether it represented guilt, knowledge, rumor, cruelty, or fascination with an already famous local crime. Over time, theories gathered around Bella. One suggested that she had been involved in espionage. Wartime Britain certainly contained intelligence networks. Enemy agents and citizens living under assumed identities. Hagley Wood was also located within a region important to wartime industry. But a plausible historical atmosphere is not the same thing as evidence. No surviving intelligence record has conclusively identified Bella as a spy or linked an agent to the remains. One proposed identity involved a German performer named Clara Bauer, sometimes associated with a wartime espionage story. The theory attracted attention because she was said to have known an agent connected to Britain and because her later whereabouts appeared uncertain. But reported descriptions of Bauer do not align neatly with the forensic estimate, particularly regarding height. No verified dental comparison or documentary chain has established that she was the woman in the tree. Another account emerged years later through claims attributed to a woman using the name Anna. In that story, Bella was said to have been involved with foreign agents and killed after becoming a liability. The account contained dramatic details, but it arrived long after the event and could not be independently confirmed. There was no identified body of supporting records, no verifiable witness statement from the time, and no physical evidence connecting that narrative to Hagley Wood. There were also stories that Bella had been a local sex worker, perhaps known only by a first name or nickname. Such a woman might have lived at society's margins, moved between lodging houses and gone unreported when she disappeared. That possibility reflects a real investigative difficulty. Vulnerable adults were often poorly documented, but no specific woman fitting that description has been conclusively matched through dentistry, clothing, family testimony, or other evidence. And then there is the ritual murder theory. Driven largely by the missing hand and the body's placement inside a tree, some writers connected those details to folklore or occult practices. It makes for a striking story, but the evidential foundation is weak. A detached hand can result from decomposition and animal activity. A hollow tree can simply be a convenient hiding place. Unusual facts do not automatically combine into proof of ritual intent. This is one of those cases where repetition can make speculation sound established. A theory appears in a book, then in an article, then in another retelling that cites the earlier version. Eventually, the idea feels like part of the original police file even when it began decades later. With Bella, it is important to keep returning to the small core of verified evidence and to separate contemporary findings from stories added after the case became folklore. Even the name Bella has that problem. It feels intimate now, as though we know something about her, but we do not know whether she ever answered to it. The name came from an unknown hand writing on a wall after the discovery. It preserved public interest, but it may also have pulled attention toward an identity that never existed. The real woman could have had an entirely different name, nationality, accent, and personal history. The remains themselves might once have answered more questions through modern forensic methods. DNA profiling, isotope analysis, and updated facial reconstruction have helped identify people in other long-running cases. But Bella's remains and associated evidence were not preserved in a way that has allowed a clear modern identification. Their precise later history has been uncertain, leaving investigators without the kind of biological sample that might now be compared with relatives or genealogical databases. In 2005, West Mercia police reviewed the case. More than 6 decades had passed since the discovery. Potential witnesses were likely dead, memories had faded, and records had been lost or dispersed. The review concluded that no clear investigative leads remained. It was not a declaration that the mystery could never be solved. It was an acknowledgement that police no longer had a practical path forward using the evidence available to them. That leaves us with a hauntingly incomplete timeline. Sometime around late 1941 or 1942, a woman died, possibly through suffocation. Her body was taken into Hagley Wood and hidden inside a hollow wych elm. For more than a year, nobody found her. In April of 1943, 4 boys entered the wood and looked into the tree. From that moment onward, investigators searched for a name that never came. The person responsible may have been a partner, an acquaintance, a criminal associate, or someone encountered only briefly. The concealment suggests time, effort, and a desire to delay discovery, but it does not tell us motive. Was the tree chosen in panic or planned in advance? Did the killer act alone? Did anyone else know? Each question sounds answerable until you look at what remains and realize how little survived. There's also another possibility worth remembering. Someone did notice she was gone. Perhaps a friend searched quietly. Perhaps a relative assumed she had chosen not to return. Perhaps a missing person report was filed under a different surname in another region with an inaccurate age or height. The connection may have existed somewhere in the records but never been made. An unidentified person is not necessarily an unloved or unnoticed person. Today, the wording still carries the case. Who put Bella in the wych elm? But before asking who put her there is a quieter question. Who was she before the tree, before the graffiti, and before decades of theories turned her into a legend? She had a voice, routines, and relationships. She may have had people who knew her smile and the irregular shape of her teeth. Those details once belonged to a living person. Hagley Wood eventually changed, and the original elm did not remain forever. Yet the question outlived the tree. It survived in books, police reviews, local memory, and graffiti repeatedly renewed by unknown writers. That endurance is not the same as resolution. Bella remains unidentified. Her cause of death uncertain, and the person who concealed her unknown. More than anything, the case is a reminder of how a name can be lost, while a question lasts for generations. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.